the second foundation of mindfulness, which is the practice of bringing our present time, non-judgmental, kind awareness to not just what's happening, but to our perception of how it feels. And what's happening and how it feels is big because it applies to everything. Every thing that the body experiences, every sensation, is perceived instantly as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The nervous system, the mind, the brain just immediately labels, I perceive this sensation as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. And of course, it's happening beyond our conscious awareness most of the time because it's happening instantly. This applies not only to the sensations in our body, but to all emotional and mental activity. Every thought that arises is perceived as pleasant or unpleasant or neutral. Every emotion, every heart experience is perceived as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. Every thought that arises in our mind, every sense door activity, even right now, just sitting here hearing these words, there's some ability to be mindful of, oh, this sounds pleasant, or maybe even the tone of my voice perceived as unpleasant or perhaps neutral. Every sight, every smell, every taste, everything is perceived. And perception is really important here because two of us could be looking at the same thing, but we'd have a different perception of whether I thought it was pleasant and you thought it was pleasant. We could put on some music right now with almost 100 people in the room now, and there'd be a lot of different perceptions of that sound depending on what kind of music it is. And so your relationship to sound is yours, is mine. It's not like, and there's this terrible tendency that many of us get into to say things like, that's ugly. That sounds terrible. That as though our perception is the ultimate truth. Part of what Buddhism is trying to teach us is to take full responsibility for what's happening inside us, to become aware, to become awake to what's happening. What's happening and how it feels. What is our perception of this is perceived as pleasant, this is perceived as unpleasant. Much of our experience is likely perceived as neutral. And again, without mindfulness, this is mostly happening beneath the radar. We're not even awake. We're not even aware to the pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. Except for when it's really intense. If you're in a lot of pain, you know it. This is unpleasant. I'm in a lot of pain. You're awake to it. Or if something really incredibly pleasant is happening, like, then you're awake to it. Oh, this feels great. This is delicious. This feels great. Then we know it. But the subtle images that are coming in and sounds that are being experienced and sensations all throughout the body, all day, every day, we're not usually so aware of the feeling tone that's happening. So the Buddha's second foundation of mindfulness is encouraging us, is leading us to take on the mind, the body, the heart, our human condition in this process of investigating what is my perception of the feeling tone that's happening in this moment. We start with the mindfulness of the breath and body, and then we open to what's pleasant, what's unpleasant, what's neutral. Now, most of you have been coming to Refuge and doing these meditations and reading the book, and you're quite aware of this. This is so important. It's, this is part of the Buddha's teaching for anybody that wants to end suffering. We have to end our habitual reactive aversion to pain. Because almost instantly, what happens to human beings and animals as well, the survival instinct is, it's painful, I want to get rid of it. I hate it. It's dangerous. And we push it away, aversion. Or our habitual reactive clinging. It's pleasant, I want to keep it. I crave for more of the pleasant, less of the unpleasant. And so for us in our recovery as addicts in recovery who've spent much of our life chasing intoxication, pleasure, trying to avoid pain and create pleasure, this practice is what we need to learn to develop a healthy relationship to pleasure and a wise relationship to pain. Because pleasure and pain, obviously, are inevitable and unavoidable. Our happiness, as the equanimity teachings show us and teach us, our happiness is not dependent on what's happening, whether it's pleasant. It depends on our relationship to what's happening. Our happiness or unhappiness isn't about there's discomfort or pain. It's, do we have enough tolerance, mercy, and compassion to be with the pain that's inevitable and unavoidable in a human incarnation? And so, core relapse prevention, recovery tool, mindfulness of the feeling tones, bringing our awareness to this level of pleasant, craving, aversion, or painful, aversion, and the investigation of what is your relationship to neutral. We'll talk more about that. We'll do the meditation, and I'll share some of my experience with waking up to my relationship to neutrality, which it didn't feel like in active addiction. Didn't feel like there was much neutrality. It was either painful or it was pleasant. But in recovery, it feels like, ooh, actually, there's quite a bit of subtle, neutral experience to be experienced. So let's meditate together, and then we'll have some more discussion. Find a way to sit that's upright, relaxed. Make any adjustments necessary to posture. And when you're ready, allow your eyes to be closed. Establish a intention to be friendly, to be kind and patient towards your own mind, heart, body. And then begin by focusing the attention on the sensations that the breath is making as it enters and exits our nostrils. First foundation of mindfulness, present time awareness of sensations in the body, focusing on the breath. course, the attention doesn't stay with the breath, it wanders back into thinking or sounds, lead to thoughts. Just keep returning to your breath. The thinking mind continues in the background. Sounds, smells, tastes, images continue. We can direct our focused attention to the breath. Come back over and over, making the breath the foreground of our experience. And begin to add the investigation of the feeling tone, second foundation, to the breath itself. As you breathe in, how does the breath feel? Is it pleasant or neutral? Perhaps unpleasant? What's your perception of the sensations of your breath as you breathe out? Using your mind to reflect, investigate, inquire. Is this pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? And perhaps naming it. Neutral, pleasant, as you breathe in and out. Now bring your attention to the top of your head, the crown of your skull. See if you can feel any sensations there. Mindfulness of the crown. Perhaps even visualizing your hair, your scalp, your skull. And then slowly, slowly dropping the attention down to the forehead, scanning slowly through the head and face, scanning your mindful attention for sensation. With this investigation of pleasant, is there any pleasant sensations in the head, the face? Is there any unpleasantness, any tightness around the eyes or jaw? Or are the sensations predominantly neutral in the head and face? See how it changes. You can be at one eyebrow and it's neutral. And as you move the attention to the next eyebrow, there's a little bit of pleasure or perhaps something uncomfortable. And as you move down to the nose, lips, tongue, teeth, jaw, when you do encounter something perceived as unpleasant and you scan through it, where does it begin? Where does it end? Become neutral again. We allow our attention to descend through the neck and into the shoulders and trunk of the body. What's unpleasant? What's pleasant? What feels neutral in the trunk of the body? The breast, the stomach, the vertebrae, the back. Scanning down the shoulders into the arms, biceps, and elbows, forearms. And the sensations created by the contact where your hands are resting on your knees or in your lap. It's the feeling tone of that contact with your hands, your legs. Down all the way through the pelvis, genitals, buttocks, anus. What sensations are present in your body? contact with the chair or the cushion. If there's any discomfort, where does it begin? Where's the middle? Where are the edges of that discomfort? Unpleasant. Out into the thighs and legs, knees. Bringing the attention all the way down into the calves, shins, and feet. Mindfulness of the body as we scan through for pleasure and pain and neutrality. How subtle some of these sensations are. We're training our mind to be present with, investigate, and to know what we're feeling in the body. Now expand beyond the physical sensations to investigate your sense doors, the sounds, both internal, whatever you're hearing in your own ears, in your own body, sounds in your room, in your space that you're in, the sounds coming through the computer, my voice, the sounds in my space. With this inquiry, are these sounds perceived as pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? Shifting the attention to seeing with the eyes closed. What images are present? Shapes, colors, light, dark. Is it neutral to have the eyes closed, or is there some subtle feelings of this is pleasant or perhaps unpleasant, some anxiousness around it? Shifting the inquiry to smell and taste. What is your nose and mouth like right now? Is there any pleasant aromas or unpleasant tastes in the mouth? Or is it somewhat neutral in this moment? And then we can open to the emotional and mental activity. Third foundation of mindfulness, with the second foundation. What am I feeling? What emotions are present right now? Grief or sorrow? Joy? Contentment, ease? How's your heart? Is it in a pleasant state, unpleasant state? Without judgment, we're just looking for what's true about this moment. And how's your mind? What kind of mood is present? What kind of attitude is the mind holding right now? What kind of thoughts are coming through? Plans and memories, are they pleasant ones or unpleasant ones? For the last couple minutes, just returning to the breath, the body, the heart, the mind, the present time experience. So this meditation on the second foundation of mindfulness, what's pleasant, and what's our relationship to pleasure, how much attachment, craving, and clinging. What's our relationship to pain, how much intolerance, aversion, perhaps even hatred we bring to our own pain. What's your relationship to neutrality? All of these places in the body that you can feel, but they're neither pleasant nor unpleasant. And when you're ready, you can allow your eyes to be open, bringing your attention back to the space you're in. And even as you open your eyes, that investigation, what is seeing, these instant perceptions, as you look around your space and the computer appears and the people in the Zoom room, my big face, each other's faces, and that perception of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And you could even, it's an interesting practice on Zoom, I think, the second foundation of mindfulness, without the judgments, just like when you're on group view, when it's on gallery, and you can kind of just scan and you look at the different people and you can see like, oh, I know some of these people and it's pleasant to see them. And, there's just this like pleasant. And then there's all these people, I don't know them, so they're kind of neutral. And then maybe there's somebody in the room where you're like, ooh, unpleasant. I just have a judgment. I have a fear. I don't know, what it is. There's just something about, tattooed, bald white guys that are just unpleasant to look at, like whatever it is. And, you just watch your mind and that perception of pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And it's not even judgment, right? This is where mindfulness is different, non-judgmental. Well, I mean, of course, we have our judgments, right? We have our judgments, of course, our conditioned judgments. But what mindfulness is showing us is that there's all of this instant, unintentional categorizing of experience. It's not a judgment, it's discernment. It's perception, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. I'm sure you have a lot of awareness of what your relationship to pleasure is like. You know how much you like pleasure. Now, in general, people love pleasure. There are some people who have some aversion to pleasure, right? That experience something that even though the sensations or the maybe pleasant, that there's something anxiety producing around it or some kind of aversion to it. In general, people hate pain. But of course, some of us have a perception of certain types of pain that we perceive it actually as pleasant. I always like to talk about, what's your relationship to spicy food? I think spicy food is one of the best examples here, where jalapenos or habaneros or ghost peppers or, some sort of chili peppers. Now, technically, chili peppers are producing pain in our mouths. But many people perceive that painful, intense sensation of the hot sauce as pleasant. So it's one of the common examples that many of us can relate to, where we think, oh, well, it's painful, but I like it. And so I don't hate all forms of pain, especially when I've, chosen to eat that spicy food and it's painful, but it's actually my perception of it is pleasant. I asked at the end of the meditation, what is your relationship to neutrality? And just even as we scan through the body and we look for, oh, wow, there's all this sensation on my sides and on my legs where I can feel it, but it's neither pleasant nor unpleasant. It's just sensation. I just feel like, oh, that's my rib cage and that's my thighs and that's my armpit, and it doesn't feel unpleasant. It also doesn't feel very pleasant, but it's just sensation. And so this is what is meant by neutral sensation. Things that we experience, but neither pleasant nor unpleasant. Maybe a lot of what happens in our mind is that sort of chatter that happens a lot. It's neither pleasant nor unpleasant. A lot of things we see, especially when you're conditioned to your own environment and you see the same shit on the wall every day, it becomes neutral. But maybe in the beginning, when you got that piece of art, you're like, it was so pleasant to look at for a while in my relationship. Ooh, it was so pleasant to look at. And someone else comes in the house and they're like, oh, that's an amazing painting, or I love that poster, or whatever it is. And this is really key to seeing how what was once pleasant, like we have this, neuroscience calls it a hedonic treadmill, that when we experience something pleasant, it doesn't last, right? This is the Buddha's teaching of impermanence, and why craving is repetitive. Because you can, what was once pleasant, it won't satisfy us for long. It's too impermanent. You look at that picture enough, you're going to lose that, interest in it. You have that same sensation enough and it loses. And that the treadmill is that repetitive cycle of going around and around, looking for the next pleasant experience, something new, something more intense, something spicier. We go from the jalapenos to the habaneros, and pretty soon you're snorting ghost peppers. And so I want to open it up for dialogue, questions, make sure that this makes sense, that what we're talking about here is so key to our recovery, because everything all the time is being perceived as pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. And part of this, and part of why meditation is so important in our recovery, is because if we can't learn to be uncomfortable and develop a wise relationship to our pain and the unpleasantness in life, it's going to be so hard to stay in recovery, to stay sober. It's going to be so hard. Meditation teaches us, even just the sitting here with the achy knees and the sore back and the loud mind, teaches us to increase our tolerance and our relationship of mercy and compassion towards our own pain. The more we sit here and we see the impermanence, that everything that happens arises and it passes, nothing lasts all that long, and we start to practice more non-attachment towards the pleasant. We say, like, okay, pleasure is wonderful when it's appropriate and a kind of healthy kind of pleasure, but it's going to pass. It's not worth clinging to. Once we get attached, we suffer. And so this is really showing us where we create suffering in our clinging to pleasure and our aversion to pain, and giving us the tools to start to learn to meet our pain with compassion, our pleasure with non-attached appreciation. And this is the kind of joy and contentment that we can access in recovery. So I'll leave it there. I need to end a little early tonight, so I'm going to leave the teaching part there, but let's have some Q&A. If you have a question down in the reactions or under the participants, you can raise your hand and I'll call on you and we can dialogue a little bit about this. It makes perfect sense. Okay, do we have a question? Yeah, go ahead. Joseph.
Yeah, hi. My name is Joe. It's very nice to see you here. Well, I've been kind of getting back into meditation practice after being out of it for a while, and had a pretty bad relapse recently. Just came out of a rehab, and well, in the past, I looked at meditation. I consider myself a pretty spiritual person, and I looked at meditation sheerly as, a spiritual thing. And but as I was in this rehab more recently, they did one of these little diagram things that I've seen 100 times of, this is your brain on drugs kind of thing. And but it was interesting how they broke it down. With, basically you have the back of the mind, which is the emotional center, or, your oldest memories for survival purposes. And then the front of the mind, the frontal lobe, is like where my, values and morals are and everything like that. And just the fact that the survival part, operates about 20 times faster. I've seen these little diagrams like a bunch of times, been in and out of rehabs more than I like to admit. but it really stood out to me being that like in my stay there, I was there for 35 days and I really made a big focus of it, the Refuge program, and also just my own personal meditation practice, doing Vipassana type meditation. And I'm finding, more of it, you said something about, psychology before, and I'm finding it, my meditation practice right now. I mean, I have my spiritual beliefs and spiritual practice as well, and I find it important. But I'm finding that in my meditation, I'm looking at it more like psychological surgery, if you will, like, more of a training of the, monkey mind, you know, and that visualization of just knowing, like, okay, this is my amygdala fucking with me right now. Uh, and being mindful that right now I might feel like I'm thinking clearly, but that part of my brain doesn't think, it feels, and it acts, um, or it reacts rather. And the thought center is kind of just shut off. Um, It doesn't make me any less likely to relapse, unfortunately, that knowledge, but it gives me hope, and a little more clarity in my meditations recently. Like, when I catch myself in a moment of anxiety and I'm able to externalize that feeling and that thought as, this is not me, this is something that's happening inside of me. Um, just would like to know your thoughts on that, as far as, meditation being more scientific versus more spiritual. I find myself like, where it's a beautiful mixture of the two. But what would your thoughts be on all that?
Um, well, at one point somebody asked the Buddha, how does this work? How does this meditation stuff work? And he used the example, he held up a soft stone. And he said, as though you're dripping water at the same place on this soft stone over and over. So when you're bringing mindfulness back to the body, back to the breath, when you're bringing mindfulness and investigating the feeling tone, it's like you're dropping water on the stone. He said, and eventually it leaves a dent, and eventually it creates a pathway. And like, this is ancient neuroscience.
Yeah.
Like the Buddha understood neuroplasticity, and that what we were doing, and he talked about it all the time, training the mind. You use the
Monkey
analogy,
mind.
the monkey mind, right? And he said, we have to train this monkey mind. We have to, through repetition, we keep coming back to the body, we keep coming back to the breath, we keep investigating pleasant, unpleasant, neutral. We keep reflecting on the impermanent, the impersonal, the unsatisfactory. And we train the mind. The untrained mind is reactive. And that's what, like, in this mindfulness, you just watch how quickly your amygdala, that fight flight part of the mind, just is like, wait, that's pleasant, I want it. That's unpleasant, I want to kill it. I got to get rid of it. And so you just wake up to how the mind works. The long-term effects of mindfulness and Vipassana, that's the same thing, present time awareness, changes how the mind functions. Now, it doesn't get rid of the amygdala. Long-term meditation doesn't get rid of desires and aversions, but it gives us an awareness and a pause and an ability to be like, to have the discernment of like, oh, that's a really unwise thought, I'm not going to chase that one. That, when the mind says, you should read, you should use, you should, and you are able to just be like, oh, that's just an impermanent, impersonal, unpleasant thought arising in my mind, and I'm going to relate to it rather than obey it. So this is the long-term benefits of this kind of meditation. And so it is more practical humanist psychology than spiritual. I like to use the term spiritual. I've written these books about the spiritual revolutionaries and all of that stuff, but there's not really anything spiritual about it. it's emotional intelligence, it's wisdom in the kind of wise response to the human condition. But that we're not talking about spirit, we're not talking about soul, we're not talking about mystical anything. We're talking about the human ability to wake up, see clearly our own minds and the world, and learn to respond appropriately. So much more humanist psychology than some sort of spiritual externalizing or mystical anything.
Yeah, thank you.
Welcome, Joseph, and welcome to Refuge. And I hope you find a lot of community here to support you. Get a mentor, do the inventories, come to lots of meetings, you know the deal, and stay close to community, be of service, and that's how this thing works.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm still kind of searching for a mentor, but I'm working the program the best I can in the meantime.
Awesome. Where are you?
I'm on Long Island, New York.
Good. I think that there are some in-person meetings. We'll be starting in. I know Long Island's a big place, but hopefully it'll be close to you. And there are definitely some online meetings that are happening out there too. So.
Yeah, a few years ago I was going to some in Long Beach, which is not far from me, but not sure. I haven't gotten back in touch with those guys. I haven't tried, honestly. I've been home a few weeks and I've been doing the online thing for now, but I think it's time for me to get some in-person stuff going on.
My sense is that in most places, there's just the in-person meetings are just starting to come back. So I'm not sure if they've started in Long Beach or not yet, but they will soon, I think.
Thanks a lot. And by the way, I read Dharma Punks while I was away. I was locked away and one of the counselors had your book on his shelf and I was like, oh shit. And I read it and awesome. I related with you a lot on that.
Thanks, Joseph. Appreciate it. Hope our paths cross at one point.
Me too.
I got time for one more question, comment, reflection. I'm going to end it around 6 my time. David, jump in.
Hi, I'm all the way in the Philippines right now, so I'm very far away from you guys. And I've been struggling with recovery. I sort of a serial relapser and so on. But what I want to ask about the questions in terms of the things you're talking about, aversion, is, what do you do about things that when you've got built up aversion? You've got things like there's certain things about my work, for example, that I just can't stand. It's things that I have to do. It's part of my job, but I can't stand it. But when it comes along, I start getting really depressed and stuff, and I find it really difficult to kind of to function. And then this is where I start reaching out for alcohol and stuff, and I'm wondering how do you wear away at that stone, where there's this a complete aversion to something that's been built up over a long period of time.
Sure. So a couple of thoughts here, and thank you, David, and thanks for joining us from the Philippines. And
glad to be here. Yeah.
Welcome. I don't know how much meditation or how long you've been meditating, but my experience is that the more I learn to sit still and be uncomfortable and tolerate the kind of internal discomfort, that there's a way in which the meditative discipline of being with our pain, and even though we have some aversion to it, but just increasing the tolerance and moving towards friendliness and compassion, that started in my life to externalize of, the better I got at tolerating myself, my own shit, the more tolerant I was towards others. And the more, those kind of difficulties that in work or school or family or relationships, from the inside out, the more tolerance, the more, and this meditation, turning towards our pain and learning to tolerate it, will help for sure in the long run. And then there's some things are just annoying, right? Some things are just unpleasant. And if you're in a career where there's certain parts of your job that are just unpleasant, there's some level of acceptance rather than, ooh, maybe sometime I'll get so spiritual that this won't be unpleasant anymore. It will still be unpleasant. You'll just have more tolerance for it. You'll just have more acceptance of like, okay, here comes this difficult part of the job. Here comes this. But rather than meeting it with resentment and fear and judgment, and I want to drink about this unpleasantness, we will get to the place where we're like, okay, unpleasantness, and I'm going to show up and I'm going to stay sober and I'm going to tolerate it the best that I can. I'm going to use my mindfulness. I'm going to name it unpleasant. I'm going to name my relationship to it right now as aversion. And I'm going to try to, sometimes even though it's like, maybe it's a person or it's an activity or something, bringing the forgiveness practice to it rather than I fucking hate this part of it. I forgive you as much as I can, even towards the activity, right? I forgive you towards having to do this part of the job, and training the mind, as I was saying to the other gentleman, we train the mind to not only be present, but then also to respond wisely with compassion, with forgiveness. So first we just learn to sit and learn to be uncomfortable, and that'll help. And then we learn to have some compassion and some forgiveness for all the, there's so many unpleasantnesses in our lives. And when we've been running to the drink, the drugs, the behaviors to avoid them, it's so easy to get stuck in that cycle of that kind of false sense of control of like, I don't like how this feels. I'm going to drink it away. I'm going to snort it, shoot it, fuck it, spend it, eat it away. And then we learn to be like, okay, I'm just going to learn to be with it. And the reality is it's impermanent. So I don't need to drink it away. It will arise, it will pass. I don't need to act out. It'll come, it'll go. And that we have much more capacity for tolerance than the mind believes, than that, fight or flight part of our brain will tell us every time, like, this is going to kill you. You can't do this. It won't kill you. It's okay to just be uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think it's kind of it's about a buildup of aversion where it links to depression as well, and it's if anybody suffers from depression, I'm sure some do. It's when you sink into that zone of sort of blackness. It's just, I've described it sometimes. It's like when you're not there, you can look at it and go, hey, I wonder what it was like to have been that depressed. But when you are there, you think, I can't see any way to get out of this at all. And it's just, I think I look at these aversions kind of like I find propel me into that. I'm looking to kind of ways to kind of like perhaps make the unpleasant pleasant. Or maybe it's just, maybe that's unreasonable.
I think it probably is unreasonable, but so reframing it of like, it's not going to become pleasant, but I want to learn to tolerate it. I want to learn to, when the Buddha says, we can get enlightened, we can have these awakenings. It's not that life is going to be pleasant all of the time. It's that we're going to be able to deal skillfully with all of the unpleasantness that life will continue to throw our way. I always, having studied the Buddha's life quite a bit, he, his community was full of conflict. There was wars happening. His family was murdered by his in-laws. He himself was attacked over and over by his cousin and injured and, walking around. And he's like, there's a lot of unpleasantness happening. This is difficult. He said, but I have learned to meet it all with compassion. And I can tolerate all of it. I don't suffer at all of these painful experiences, but I still experience all of these painful experiences.
All right, thanks. Thank you.
Welcome. I'm going to leave it there for tonight. What's my last words? My last words are get involved, do service, start meetings. If there's not meetings in your area, if the in-person meetings aren't happening, get them going, get the in-person meetings going. Do the inventories, mentor each other. You don't got to look for the perfect, enlightened mentor. Just find someone, work together with, if you're both working on your inventories, that's great. Support each other in that process. And if you can, join us at the Refuge Conference. I think there's a handful of registrations left. We're having the conference next weekend, June 11th, 12th, 13th in Malibu. About 150 people from Refuge from all over the country are going to be together outdoors, socially distanced, where we're going to have meetings and we're going to have discussions and we're going to connect around this path that we're all on together. So next month, I'll be doing the first Thursday on the third foundation, where we'll continue the topic of mindfulness and we'll talk about the mind, both the process of the mind and the contents, and how we can meditate mindfully on what's arising rather than being so addicted to the contents. So I hope that makes sense. And I hope to see you guys and gals, everybody, next month. First Thursday. Thank you for joining me, and may any merit that comes from our practice be shared outward in all directions. May each one of us find freedom and recovery, and together may we help others who are seeking recovery. And let's create a positive change on this whole fucking planet. Thank you, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, Noah.
Welcome.